Hi, my name's DebKirkman, and this is my story. My story starts with the verse John 16:33, never being more real to me than the fall of 1981. The verse is where Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he says that I'm telling you these things so that you may have peace in me. For in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. In 1981, I was a 15-year-old student in high school. Had always been an athlete, had always been active, and suddenly became unable to do the smallest activity. Very short of breath and very tired, so my mom took me to the doctor thinking that the worst case, I had an upper respiratory infection. I went to the doctor and he checked me out and listened to my chest, and he asked me to leave the room so he could talk with my mom. My mom walked out of the exam room and said, we need to go to the hospital. They weren't sure what or where or why, so they put me in isolation for a week, not knowing what was wrong with me. It gave me a lot of time to get back in touch with God. The night before my surgery, I had a couple visitors, and one was Fred Kehoe. And this was one of the more lucid memories that I have before the surgery. I remember he came in and spoke with me and prayed with me, and he turned to walk out of the door, but then paused and stopped and turned around and looked at me and pointed at me with all authority. And he said, in the name of Jesus Christ, that tumor will be dead from the inside out. At that point, my second visitor came. He was a young pastor. He had just started pastoring in this area. Very kind, very nice, spent some time and spoke with me and prayed with me. And if I remember rightly, the name was Paris. Yes, it was Greg Paris. Thanks, Greg. So those were my last two visitors before my surgery. Then in 1981, the surgeon told my parents that they would go in and find what the problem was, and it would take approximately 4 hours, give or take. So I went in, had the surgery. 4 hours turned into 8 hours. The 8 hours finally ended. They came out, and the surgeon told my mother that it was a tumor. It was a mass. The mass was the size of a football. It had encompassed my entire respiratory system, pushed my heart to the right side of my chest cavity, had grown into my diaphragm, had grown into my left shoulder, had grown around my aorta, and it had grown into my vocal cords. He had told my mother and my father, had I been 40 years old, he would have closed me up. He said, but you know, something told me to give her a chance. So with that, he said, here are some of the long-term effects if she lives. She will never talk, never speak again. I had to totally, completely cut her vocal cords. If she does talk, it will be with a very hushed whisper. He cut all the connecting nerve, blood, and muscle tissues that connected my left arm to my body, so that I eventually would lose my left arm. It would atrophy. At that point, he said, my job is done. I was turned over to an oncologist, and this oncologist had almost become family because my grandfather and cousin had both previously been cancer patients, so we knew this oncologist quite well. And while I was post-op in the hospital, this oncologist came to my parents and said, now you realize the odds are stacked against her. And my mom said she remembers looking at him and saying, now doctor, you know what we have that fills the gap. And he said, yes, I know, and that is very important. And at that point, they stood in agreement that the faith and the God that we serve was enough to fill the gap. I was sent home on chemo, radiation. I was 15 years old, so at that point, my biggest concern was I going to lose my hair? And my family had, behind my back, kind of asked the oncologist, is she gonna keep her hair? Is there any way she can keep her hair? And the oncologist said, not unless the chemo doesn't work. There's a 1,000,000 to 1 chance that she'll ever keep her hair. I continued, I graduated from high school, got through the chemo, got through the radiation. One of the things that they said that was a potential, well, we have to wait and see, was that whether I would ever be able to have children due to the strength and the nature of the chemo. But my family never asked, and we never, as a collective unit, never asked God, why God, why God, why God? More, okay, God, how are you going to use this? Use this, God. It's one question that God will always answer every time is, use this. Please use this. Don't let me go through this for nothing. And so before I was even out of the hospital, I had a visitor. It was a girl from high school, and I didn't know her well, but she said she had felt compelled to come visit me. So we spoke and we talked, and I shared how I vowed that I was going to let God use this. I wasn't going to be taken down by it, and that, you know, whatever happens, it would be God's will and God's way. And so she left, and I didn't think much about it. Not too many days after that, she came back and told me, I don't know why I came to see you, but she said, the day I came to see you, I was planning to commit suicide. And after talking to you, she said, there you were fighting for your life, and I was going to take my own. And she said, then I decided to change my mind. I told my mom, and she goes, well, there's victory number one. And it wasn't, we agreed that it wasn't me, and it wasn't my mom. It was what God was doing in me through this. And that was the ultimate. So that was one victory. Will I ever know everything that has come from this? Probably not, and I don't need to know. God, I just pray that God continues to use it. As far as the things that the doctor said would happen to me, none of them have happened. I went on. I have full use of my left arm. I never lost my hair. I went on to have two beautiful, beautiful children. And the funny thing is, after the surgery, and the surgeon had given my parents all the things that were going to happen to me, he said, you know, the funniest thing is that tumor was dead on the inside. The core was dead. And he said, I've never ever seen anything like that. The most incredible thing of all is the vocal cords. They told me that I would never speak ever again, except over a hushed whisper. And I'm now in the middle of my 21st year of teaching middle school. And 2 years ago, I had some health issues that took me to a ear, nose, and throat doctor. And he was looking at my records, and he looked at me and he said, you know, it's funny, your records say that both sides of your vocal cords are completely paralyzed. And I said, yes, that's the case. He goes, no, it's not. Your right side of your vocal cords are completely and totally functioning. That was 28 years after the fact. So I know that God's still at work. He's still using it in spite of myself. And so it takes me back to John 16:33, where he tells even me that he gives me these words so that I have peace in him. Because I'm going to have problems, we're going to have problems in this world. But to have heart, take heart, because he's overcome the world.